The radio cut out at 3:47 in the morning. 1 second, a captain's voice. Calm, professional, routine position report. The next second, nothing. Static. Then the sound that every maritime monitoring station in the Gulf of Oman dreads more than any other. An open channel, a crash of sound, voices shouting in Farsi, and then silence so complete it felt like the ocean had swallowed the ship whole. That was the moment Iran captured its first vessel of the night. 17 minutes later, the second ship's transponder went dark. 2 commercial vessels, 2 crews, seized inside the Strait of Hormuz in a single operational window, while a United States naval blockade, backed by 3 carrier strike groups and the most advanced maritime surveillance system ever deployed in these waters, was watching every square kilometer of that strait in real time. Let that land for a second. The most powerful naval force on the planet had its eyes on that water. And Iran walked in, took 2 ships, and walked out. Now here is the number I need you to hold in your mind for the rest of this video. 20%. That is the percentage of the world's daily oil supply that moves through the Strait of Hormuz. Not 5%, not 10%, 20%. Every single day. And tonight, the country that controls the coastline on one side of that strait just demonstrated in front of every military commander and every oil trader and every government on earth that it can reach into that water and take whatever it wants, even with America watching. This is not a provocation. This is not a miscalculation. This is Iran sending a message written in seized hulls and silenced radio channels, and the message says 4 words: "We are still here." But here is what nobody on television is explaining tonight. And this is the part that should genuinely alarm you. These 2 ship seizures did not happen because Iran is strong. They happened because Iran is calculating that the window for this kind of move is closing fast, and it needed to use it before that window shuts completely. Understanding why Iran made this move right now, why it chose these 2 specific vessels, and what it expects to happen next, that is the story underneath the story. And that is exactly what we are going to cover today. You need to be subscribed to this channel right now. Hit that button and turn on every notification. The situation in the Strait of Hormuz is moving faster than any 24-hour news cycle can follow, and you cannot afford to be even one update behind on what is happening here. To understand what Iran just did and why it did it tonight of all nights, you need to understand the pressure cooker that has been building in these waters for the past 6 weeks. Because what happened at 3:47 this morning did not come from nowhere. It came from a very specific sequence of decisions, each one escalating the last, each one narrowing the options available to both sides. Go back to February 28th. America and Israel launched coordinated strikes on Iran. Senior military commanders were killed. Critical infrastructure was destroyed. Washington's expectation, stated openly, not just implied, was that Iran would fracture within days. That the economic pressure combined with the military shock would produce a government desperate enough to accept American terms on the nuclear program and walk away from its regional proxy networks. That did not happen. What happened instead was this. Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz. One decision, one move. And within 72 hours, the global energy market went into a controlled panic. Brent crude crossed $97 a barrel. Bangladesh, a nation of 170 million people, announced it was rationing fuel for essential services. The Philippines declared a national energy emergency. Asian manufacturing hubs that run 24 hours a day on imported Gulf oil started calculating how many days of reserve capacity they had left. Iran did not collapse. Iran bent the world. I want to hear from you right now. Comment the word escalate if you believe Iran's ship seizures tonight will push this conflict into direct military confrontation between U.S. and Iranian forces. Comment the word negotiate if you think this is Iran's last card before a deal gets forced through. Drop it below. I read every single comment, and your read on this matters. Then came the blockade. Starting April 13th, the United States imposed a full naval blockade on Iranian ports and coastlines. 10,000 military personnel, dozens of warships, approximately 10% of America's total naval strength, all deployed to squeeze Iran's oil exports to zero. The thinking in Washington was straightforward. If Iran's economy bleeds fast enough, the regime will accept terms it previously rejected, rather than watch its country collapse from within. And then something happened that shattered whatever remained of the diplomatic framework. On April 19th, the USS Spruance, an American destroyer, fired multiple rounds into the engine room of an Iranian cargo vessel, the MV Tuska, disabled it in open water, and U.S. Marines boarded and seized it. Iran's foreign ministry called it maritime piracy. Iran's parliament speaker called it an act of war. And Iran's military command did what military commands do when they believe they are at war. they started planning their response. What you witnessed at 3:47 this morning was that response. And here's the thing you need to understand about how Iran thinks about these moments. Iran does not respond immediately. It does not react emotionally. It waits. It selects. It chooses the moment and the method that sends the maximum message with the minimum exposure to direct American retaliation. 2 commercial ships seized in a single night. Not military vessels, not American-flagged ships, but commercial vessels linked to operators connected to countries inside the American coalition is not random. It is a carefully chosen signal. Iran is saying, your blockade does not own this water, and we will prove it every time you forget that. At 3:47 a.m. Gulf Standard Time, the MV Ariadne Star, a Maltese-flagged bulk carrier traveling in a commercial convoy, was approaching the northern exit of the Strait of Hormuz when its crew reported visual contact with multiple fast-moving vessels approaching from the Iranian coastline at high speed. The captain's radio transmission to the nearest Maritime Coordination Center lasted 41 seconds. In those 41 seconds, you can hear him attempt to identify the approaching craft, issue a standard challenge on Channel 16, receive no response, and then, in the last 7 seconds of the recording, issue a single phrase that maritime monitors have heard before in these waters and never forget. They are boarding. They are boarding us now. The channel went dead. For the next 11 minutes, maritime monitoring stations in Oman, the UAE, and aboard U.S. Navy vessels in the region tracked the Ariadne Star's AIS transponder going through a series of erratic course changes, the signature pattern of a vessel being maneuvered by people who are not its crew, before the transponder was switched off entirely. Then at 4:04 a.m., the MV Celestine Bridge, a Panamanian-flagged container vessel traveling approximately 4 nautical miles behind the Ariadne Star, began broadcasting a distress signal on the international emergency frequency. The distress signal lasted 3 minutes and 20 seconds before it too fell silent. 2 ships, 17 minutes, gone. But while the seizures were happening in the Strait, something else was also happening simultaneously inside the USS Abraham Lincoln's Combat Information Center, 140 kilometers south of the incident location. According to defense sources familiar with the operational picture, the Lincoln's watch team had tracked the approaching Iranian fast attack craft from the moment they left their coastal positions. The craft were moving fast, over 40 knots, which is not unusual for IRGC patrol operations. But their trajectory, their formation, and the specific timing of their movement, all of it was logged, flagged, and escalated up the chain of command in real time. The watch commander's reported first question, according to sources familiar with the exchange, was direct. Do we have authority to intercept? The answer that came back down the chain, after what sources describe as a tense 7-minute consultation that reached the highest levels of the operational command, was no. Read that again, slowly. The United States Navy, with full real-time awareness of what was about to happen, with the assets in position to intervene, made a decision not to intercept the seizure operation as it was unfolding. Why? Because intercepting Iranian fast attack craft in the process of boarding a commercial vessel inside waters that Iran considers its own legitimate security zone would not have been a law enforcement operation. It would have been an act of war in the most direct, unambiguous sense. A shooting engagement between American and Iranian military forces in a 33-kilometer choke point through which 20% of global oil flows every single day. Pause. The decision not to intercept was not weakness. It was the most consequential act of restraint in this entire conflict. And it raises a question that every naval commander, every oil trader, and every government watching this situation is now asking out loud. If America will not use its assembled military force to prevent Iranian seizures in the Strait, while the seizures are happening in real time, then what exactly is the blockade protecting? At that exact same moment, while the 2 crews were being transferred to Iranian patrol vessels and the seized ships were being redirected toward Iranian territorial waters, oil markets opened for the Asian trading session. The price of Brent crude moved $11.40 in 4 minutes. Not $1, not $2, $11.40 in 4 minutes on the news that Iran had just demonstrated the blockade had gaps wide enough to sail 2 ships through. $11.40 per barrel, multiplied across 20% of global daily oil supply, across every tanker, every contract, every futures position held by every pension fund and sovereign wealth fund and energy company on the planet. The market was not reacting to a geopolitical development. The market was repricing the probability of a world war. And it priced that probability at $11.40 higher than it was yesterday. Does that make sense? Because here is where it gets worse. According to leaks from diplomatic sources in Washington, cited this morning by 3 separate international news organizations, an emergency session of the National Security Council was convened within 90 minutes of the first seizure being confirmed. The participants? The National Security Advisor, the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the Secretary of State, the Director of Central Intelligence, and the Director of National Intelligence. The topic was not whether Iran had seized the vessels. That was confirmed. The topic was sequencing. Specifically, what happens in the next 6 hours that does not start a war that nobody in that room has a plan to win cleanly. We have learned from sources close to the NSC session that the Joint Chiefs presented 3 response options. The first, a direct kinetic response, targeted strikes on the IRGC naval base that launched the seizure operation. Fast, visible, militarily low risk. Politically catastrophic because it transforms an incident into an exchange. And exchanges in the Strait of Hormuz have no guaranteed stopping point. The second option, an immediate escalation of the blockade, seizing Iranian vessels in international waters in direct retaliation, ship for ship. This option had the advantage of symmetry, a response that matches the provocation without crossing into direct combat. Its disadvantage? Iran has already demonstrated it is willing to respond to seizures with seizures. A tit-for-tat seizure cycle in the world's most critical energy choke point is not a controlled escalation. It is a slow-motion collision. The third option, restraint paired with an ultimatum, a formal 24-hour demand for the release of both vessels and their crews, backed by a publicly stated military consequence if the deadline is not met. It was a cold, calculated session. They looked at option 1, which solved the military problem and created a political catastrophe. They looked at option 2, which maintained proportionality and accelerated the spiral. They looked at option 3, which preserved decision space but communicated to Iran and to every country watching that America's red lines have some give in them. The decision that emerged, according to sources familiar with the outcome, split the room. And a room that splits on a decision about ships being seized in the Strait of Hormuz is a room that is genuinely uncertain about where this conflict goes next. But here is what the NSC session was not discussing, what the television coverage is completely missing. And this is the layer underneath everything else. One of the 2 seized vessels, the MV Celestine Bridge, was not an ordinary commercial cargo ship. It was carrying industrial equipment contracted to a company with documented ties to 3 separate Gulf state governments, governments that are formally neutral in the U.S.-Iran conflict, but have been quietly facilitating American logistical operations in the region since the blockade began. If Iran knows what was on that ship, and the operational precision of the seizure suggests strongly that it did, then this was not a random act of commercial harassment. It was targeted, intelligence-driven interdiction. Iran seized a vessel it knew was connected to American coalition logistics. It sent a message not just to Washington, but to every Gulf state government that believes its quiet cooperation with America is invisible. It is not invisible. Iran has eyes. And tonight, it proved it. Why did Iran do this tonight? Not the surface answer. The real answer, the one that explains the timing, the selection of targets, and the deliberate precision of the operation. Follow the pressure curve. Iran has been under the most intense economic and military pressure of its modern existence for the past 6 weeks. The blockade is working in the sense that it is painful. Oil revenues have collapsed. Foreign currency reserves are draining. Inflation inside Iran has crossed 43%. But it is not working in the sense that matters strategically. It has not broken the regime's will to resist, and it has not produced the nuclear concessions Washington needs to declare the operation a success. Iran's leadership is facing a decision window that is closing. The ceasefire is expiring. The diplomatic talks in Islamabad are stalled. And every day that passes without a deal, the military balance shifts further against Tehran as America tightens its operational grip on the Gulf. Iran's leadership understands this. Its military planners understand this. And they have concluded, correctly from a game theory perspective, that the moment to exercise maximum leverage is not after the pressure peaks. It is right before it peaks, while the outcome is still genuinely uncertain. This is what analysts call the last card problem. When a weaker party knows its leverage is diminishing, it is incentivized to use its most dramatic remaining moves before they lose their value entirely. The two ship seizures tonight are not a sign of Iranian confidence. They are a sign that Iran's strategic planners have concluded they need to reshape the negotiating table right now, before the blockade tightens further and before the ceasefire expiration removes the diplomatic framework entirely. Iran is not trying to win a war against the United States. Let me be very clear about this. It cannot win that war. The conventional military math does not work in Iran's favor. What Iran is trying to do is something more specific and more achievable. It is trying to make the war expensive enough, unpredictable enough, and globally disruptive enough that Washington calculates a negotiated settlement is cheaper than continuation. And here is the strategic calculation that most Western coverage completely misses. Iran does not need to defeat America to win this game. It only needs to convince three categories of actor to change their behavior. Category 1, American domestic public opinion, which is already divided on the cost and purpose of this conflict. Category 2, America's regional coalition partners, the Gulf states, whose quiet cooperation is essential to the blockade's logistics, but whose populations are watching food and fuel prices rise with increasing anger. Category 3, global financial markets, which are already pricing severe disruption and which have the power to create political pressure on Washington through economic pain alone. Two ships seized in the Strait at 3:47 in the morning moves all three of those targets simultaneously. It tells the American public the war is not going as cleanly as briefed. It tells the Gulf states their quiet cooperation has consequences they are visible for. And it tells global markets that the 20% of world oil flowing through that strait is less secure than yesterday's price reflected. Now, here is what historians will call the Hormuz paradox. And this is the structural problem that makes this conflict genuinely dangerous in a way that previous U.S.-Iran confrontations were not. The Strait of Hormuz is 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. 33 kilometers. You can see across it on a clear day. And yet, despite the most concentrated American naval presence in this region in 20 years, 3 carrier strike groups, dozens of destroyers, an AI-powered surveillance grid that can identify a ship by its propeller sound, Iran just demonstrated it can operate inside that strait, conduct a complex dual seizure operation, and withdraw its forces before any effective response can be mounted. Why? Because of a problem that no amount of American firepower solves: proximity. Iran's coastline is right there. Its fast attack craft can be at any point in the strait in minutes. American carrier strike groups are designed for deep water power projection. They are not designed for close quarters interdiction in a 33-kilometer channel, where the geography itself provides cover to the defender. The legal dimensions of this moment are also extraordinary. The two seized vessels were registered under Maltese and Panamanian flags, respectively. Both Malta and Panama are treaty partners of the United States. Their flag state rights under international maritime law create an immediate obligation for Washington to pursue diplomatic resolution through formal channels. Channels that take time, require multilateral coordination, and give Iran exactly the negotiating leverage it seized those ships to obtain. Iran did not just seize 2 ships, it seized a legal and diplomatic process that now has to run its course, during which every hour of delay is an hour of additional pressure on Washington's coalition. Here is the domino effect, and I want you to follow every step of this carefully, because each one leads somewhere most people are not looking. If the crews of the 2 seized vessels are not released within 24 hours, Washington faces an impossible public communication problem. The most powerful military in human history is operating a naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz, and sailors from countries that are American treaty partners are being held by Iran with no confirmed timeline for release. That image, coalition partners' crews in Iranian custody, American carriers nearby, no rescue operation launched, is a recruiting poster for every adversary watching how America manages alliance commitments under pressure. If Washington escalates militarily to secure the release of those crews, Iran's IRGC has already pre-positioned its response. Mine activation in the southern strait approaches, Houthi missile strikes on Saudi Aramco infrastructure, Hezbollah rocket barrages designed to pull Israel into direct engagement. Not all at once, sequentially, deniably, each one creating a new crisis before the previous one is resolved. If those crises activate simultaneously, we are looking at a regional war on 5 fronts: the Strait, Yemen, Lebanon, Iraq, and whatever direct U.S.-Iran exchange emerges from the seizure response. We're looking at a situation that makes every previous Middle East conflict since 1973 look like a contained incident. China is watching every minute of this, but not with alarm, with calculation. Here is something that almost no Western analysis is capturing tonight. China imports approximately 11 million barrels of oil per day. Of that, roughly 1.8 million barrels per day have been flowing from Iran, purchased at deep discounts that Beijing has been quietly enjoying throughout the blockade period, routed through shadow shipping networks that American sanctions theoretically prohibit, but practically struggle to fully intercept. Every hour that the strait is contested, every hour that insurance premiums for tankers rise and shipping companies reroute around Africa, the price differential between official market oil and discounted Iranian shadow oil widens. China is currently buying Iranian crude at roughly $20 to $30 per barrel below the market rate. If Brent crosses $110, which analysts at two major trading desks said was possible within 72 hours of tonight's seizures, that discount becomes even more valuable. China does not want a war in the Gulf, but a crisis that keeps oil prices elevated and Iran dependent on Chinese buyers is a crisis that serves Chinese interests in ways that peace does not. Beijing is not going to rescue this situation. It is going to profit from it for as long as it can, and only intervene, if it intervenes at all, at the last possible moment, when the economic damage to global supply chains becomes self-harming to China's own manufacturing sector. Where is Russia in all of this? Not silent. Operational. Russia's foreign minister issued a statement this morning describing the ship seizures as a predictable consequence of illegal American blockade operations. Language that legally positions Moscow as supportive of Iran's actions under international maritime law. Russia's state media ran the story of the seizures as a victory, not an incident. And Russian diplomatic back channels, according to sources cited by Reuters, have already been active since dawn, offering Islamabad a framework for presenting the seizures as justification for revised negotiating terms that soften America's demands. Russia is not a bystander. It is an active player using every hour of this crisis to deepen its position as the indispensable broker, the only party with enough access to both sides to eventually broker a resolution on terms that serve Moscow's long-term interests. The coalition fracture inside Washington is deepening faster than the public picture reveals. On one side, the military hawks who read tonight's seizures as proof that restraint is being interpreted as weakness and that only a sharp kinetic response will restore deterrence credibility. On the other side, the diplomatic and intelligence establishment, the people who understand Iran's decision calculus, who are arguing that a kinetic response to the seizures triggers exactly the multi-front escalation that Iran's planners designed this operation to produce. A White House divided between those two positions, managing an active naval confrontation in the world's most critical energy choke point, with a ceasefire expiration hours away and oil markets pricing in catastrophe. That is the operational picture tonight. And the crews of two seized vessels are sitting in that picture, waiting to find out which side of that internal Washington argument wins. The Strait of Hormuz is 33 kilometers wide. A fully loaded supertanker takes approximately 2 hours to transit it from entry to open water. For those 2 hours, every crew on every ship makes a calculation, a simple human calculation about whether the water they are sailing through is safe. For decades, that calculation had a reliable answer. Tonight, for the first time since the tanker wars of the 1980s, that answer is genuinely uncertain for every vessel approaching that strait. That uncertainty, that 2-hour window of genuine not knowing, is worth more to Iran strategically than any military engagement it could win against the United States. Because uncertainty is the commodity that moves markets, breaks coalitions, and forces governments to make decisions they would not otherwise make. Iran did not capture 2 ships tonight because it believes it can defeat the United States Navy. It captured 2 ships tonight because it understands that in a conflict where the goal is leverage, not victory, the ability to create doubt is more powerful than the ability to destroy targets. Trump is in the White House tonight managing a situation that has just changed its shape. The seizures prove that pressure alone does not equal control. Iran's military headquarters described the seizures as a legitimate response and promised that further measures will follow if the blockade continues. So where does this actually go in the next 72 hours? Expect Trump to escalate dramatically with visible force. Expect Iran to use the crews as negotiating assets. Expect Russia to insert itself as mediator. Expect markets to remain in crisis and the crews to become the human face of the standoff. The seizures did not start a world war, but they crossed a threshold that makes the path back to stable deterrence significantly harder than it was 24 hours ago. The Strait of Hormuz is no longer just a waterway, it is a test. And right now that test has no confirmed answer. 2 ships are seized, crews are missing, oil markets are repricing a world war, and the ceasefire expires in hours. If you watch this far, you already know that what is happening in the Strait of Hormuz tonight is not just a news story. It is the event that determines whether the next chapter of global history is written in negotiating rooms or in conflict zones. Subscribe to this channel right now. Turn on every single notification. The moment either of those crews is released, or the moment Iran moves again, we will have the full breakdown before anyone else. Hit the like button if this gave you a clearer picture than anything else you read today. It takes 1 second, and it puts this analysis in front of the people who need to see it most. Share this with someone who is still watching surface-level coverage and doesn't understand what is actually at stake tonight. Watch closely. Stay sharp. 2 ships gone. The world is counting what comes next.